Hi, welcome to Chief Lead. I'm Zahara Sikoris, founder of Right Hand Talent. Today's guest is Holly Grant, former COO at Long-Term Stock Exchange. LTSE is an innovative business ecosystem reimagining the role of capital markets to advance more equitable and sustainable societies. I feel like this has been a long time coming.
I'm so happy we're here.
Yeah, and you've been on an amazing journey over the past year, transition. And I always kick off these podcasts, these calls, with diving into the personal story and narrative, like your why and what led you into the chief of staff role. I think people really love hearing someone's drive, how they came across the role, the people that influenced them or helped them along the way. So would just love to hear more about your journey and your career arc.
Well, I first discovered entrepreneurship as a path in high school. I was in a public high school in Northern Virginia, and we had an elective called entrepreneurship. And that really opened up this world because I didn't know any entrepreneurs personally in my life. That wasn't one of the options I thought was available. And I got involved in that elective course and some of the business extracurriculars in my high school. And that actually led me to my first mentor and boss, who I worked for nearly 10 years. I recruited him to be my high school graduation speaker after I heard him speak at an entrepreneurship conference in Washington, D.C. And he was an incredible man. He built a company called Proxycom that took AOL and MCI online. It really built V1 of their websites, and that business he took public as the CEO and sold it before the dot-com bust. And so he was a person who was wearing many different hats when I was working for him as part of his family office, which was my first role. And it started as a hybrid business analyst, management consultant like role. But what I received from him was this gift of experiencing different industries through his board commitments and investments, and also our work together in building certain business units and companies that he was operating as CEO while I was working with him. And I think what I learned from him was how to tell a great story, to pitch something that you believe in with real heart, and how to make things happen. There was just that, like a real momentum being with him, seeing him operate, seeing all of the opportunities that could open up through relationship. And I knew that I wanted to step into the seed stage startup world after this tour in family office world. And it was interesting because of my skill set as more of an operations generalist. I thought the chief of staff role was a really unique way to see every area of the business and be a core part of the team. And I came into this role, which was the chief of staff role at Long-Term Stock Exchange, as the fourth employee. So it was a little bit different than entering later in the organization's arc. And in doing so and being part of that early team, I had a lot of operational ownership from the get-go, which was exciting. And I was essentially working with the team, doing the jobs that we hadn't hired for until we made the appropriate hire, and then handing off those responsibilities and stepping into the next set of things that the business needed to tackle. And so it was really the experience to build relationships across, all areas of the business, and to see what it takes to get a business off the ground and through these various stages. That called me to the chief of staff role. And of course, the relationship that is so unique with the founder CEO, which was another critical part of my decision to go down that path, to learn from Eric Ries, who founded Long-Term Stock Exchange.
Amazing. And that was the exact question I was going to ask. How did you come across the opportunity at LTSE?
It was very serendipitous. So I hired my first life coach when I was in my early 20s, before that was really a thing. And she introduced me to this woman, Tara Moore, who is a women's leadership coach. And she said, "Hey, you really remind me of this woman. I think you should check her out." So I was following her work for some years and actually applied for a role as part of her organization before I took the LTSE position. And she said, "Look, Holly, I think you're going to get bored. This role is too small for what you're up to in the world, but let's stay in touch." And so she became a mentor of mine. And when I was ready to make the shift out of family office into startups, I was having lunch with her in New York, and I told her, "Tara, I want to go work for a mission-based seed stage financial technology company." Those were my three primary criteria. And she was like, "Well, my partner is hiring for a role in that particular domain, and I think you guys might really hit it off." So she introduced me, and that was Eric, when he was putting together the friends and family round for LTSE. So I spent about a month interviewing to become his chief of staff, doing various exercises, testing the chemistry and fit, and then we decided to move forward.
I love that. Going back to kind of this crystallization process of figuring out the criteria, what you were going after. Not just, you knew the role that you were going after, but you crystallized the company and the industry and the focus. So can you share a little bit about that process?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, personal finance was a personal passion area for me. I was really interested in financial inclusion, especially as a woman. That was an area of study. And so I thought moving into financial technology could be a way to be a part of the evolution of that particular industry. So that's what drew me to the financial technology space. And I've always been really interested at the intersection of impact and business, because I think business is a tremendous lever for change that's under tapped right now. Still, we've seen a lot of progress in the last 5 to 10 years, but I think there's so much to come. And so that was another area for me that I was drawn to, the people who were really thinking about the evolution of the business world. And that was so central to the thesis behind LTSE, which was to really shift the incentive structure in the public markets. And so it felt like when I was looking at the opportunity that was presented, I never planned to go be part of building a new stock exchange, but that's what showed up. And it was such a beautiful fit with this criteria. So it felt like a no-brainer from there.
I want to go back to the work trial. You mentioned that it was a month long, and I want to go back to this because it's a hot button issue right now. There are essentially two camps, and it almost seems like it's candidate versus employer, where employers want to do the work trial. So there's some group of candidates that say this is unpaid work. So at least let's get a work trial that's paid. But an interesting perspective that I came across is you're essentially already doing unpaid work if you're interviewing for weeks on end and hours on end with multiple people. And what really gets you ahead and sets you apart from everyone is the work product that you can produce. So I actually recommend to all of my clients who are hiring for the chief of staff role, we dive into the interview process, and I always ask, are you offering a case study? Most of the time they say yes. But where I advise is, well, let's actually front load the case study in the process. Sometimes they leave it towards the end. And I think it's just not a good idea because you can waste a lot of time, and then things fall through at, frankly, the most critical juncture, which is determining if this person meets your bar for excellence or hopefully exceeds it. So yeah, take us back to that moment and just share with us what you actually did on the job. So take us back to that moment and share kind of what you worked on during that trial period.
Yeah. So during the trial, the first assignment was to pitch Eric LTSE. He was starting to think about a Series A since he was mid raising the friends and family round, and he didn't have any materials yet for the Series A presentation to investors. And so he said, build me a deck and bring me a pitch. And I asked him a few questions to learn more. I had heard his vision when we met for the first time, but I didn't have much to go on. And I think the real intention behind that ask was, how does this person think? How are they really seeing this opportunity? What type of work product can they deliver with minimal information? So I remember putting together a pitch, doing the research, kind of bringing him this presentation. We met in the law firm in New York when he happened to be in town from San Francisco. And I presented to him as if he were going to invest in me to build this organization. And it was really nerve wracking presenting the pitch to the founder of this vision, but I enjoyed the process. I had the opportunity to get feedback from him to hear how he was thinking about what I had shared, where I was truly aligned and where I heard him correctly and where I hadn't. And for us, that really started the working relationship. And I got a taste of how he shows up and provides feedback and the quality of work product that he's looking for. And he got a taste of what my abilities were. So that was the beginning. And then there were a few other iterations that we started working on. So I built, as part of that, a basic financial model, which became iterations on the financial model. And I think there was a third task in there that had something to do with stakeholder management, which is another core part of the chief of staff job, as you know. So it was, in terms of like where we are on this debate, it's really interesting one. And I would say as a candidate, I learned a lot about how I would fare in this relationship, which was helpful, even though it was an investment of time, unpaid. So
absolutely. Yeah. And I think for candidates who have just faced rejection a lot or been burned before, or have just been in bad processes, they develop that scar tissue. And so when it's constantly picked at in every process that, hey, there's going to be a case study, it's like, oh my gosh, not again. Right.
yeah,
but
exactly.
I think the perspective that helps is not just the employer getting a good idea of what the candidate can actually do on the job, but the candidates also evaluating who they're going to be partnering with, not just their principal, but potentially the broader team as well. And again, like you mentioned, you learn so much about the interpersonal dynamics, the management style, communication style of the principal, and the chemistry match. Like the vibe just has to be right for the role. And that is one of the most difficult nuances to nail in any screening or hiring process.
Yes. I just want to emphasize the importance of the chemistry match. And that is not just for the company, but it's also for the candidate, so that they know what they're walking into and that it feels like a really good use of their skills and their genius to be a part of that journey.
Absolutely. So you landed the chief of staff role. You did an amazing job on the work trial. And what was your time like at LTSE in hardcore build mode? And then we know you jumped into the COO role, so I want to get there too. But maybe we can learn more about what you did in the chief of staff role.
Yeah, so I spent 5 years in total at LTSE, and each year was very different because the business was in a different place and evolving quite quickly. So the first order of business when I joined was to support Eric, our founder and CEO, in raising the Series A. And so I was his deputy in that process, refining the pitch deck, helping him build a financial model, making sure that we had a game plan for outreach to investors and follow through. So I worked with him very closely on that process. And once we had closed the A, um, we went into more of a lightweight, stage appropriate process build mode. So I was focused a lot on the internal operations of the organization, making sure that we were rolling out the right set of processes, selecting the right kind of software for team collaboration, and also hiring, of course, the next cohort of employees who would join us on that ride. So that was a really fun time because we had the opportunity to imagine what kind of organization we wanted to be and then build the prototypes, roll them out, see how they actually worked with our employee base. And that was very much part of the ethos at LTSE, was to really aspire to operational excellence and to delight our own people with how we operate and the types of benefits we provide and the type of culture that we were creating. So there was a lot of internal testing and a measurement around that, which for me was very exciting, because I think, we're often emphasizing the customer experience, which is absolutely critical. And maybe when we're in survival mode, we're less focused on our own people, but it's our own people who ultimately make things happen. So that was a core part of my mandate as the chief of staff of that team. And then as time went on, I would evolve the different processes and systems that we were building. I was increasingly involved in hiring the next set of managers and leaders who would join us on the ride, and really deeply building the relationship with Eric, getting to know his preferences, getting to know how I could become an extension of him, both in our work together, but also when I was stepping into meetings that he couldn't always be a part of with the team. So there was a lot of that over the course of the first, I would say, like 2 to 2.5 years in that role. And it was evolving. So my trajectory there was chief of staff and then head of operations and head of finance, and then ultimately the chief operating officer role over the course of that 5-year period. So Eric and I talked about it as essentially expanding my portfolio of direct responsibilities. So I had my hands in those functional areas from the get-go, but I was becoming increasingly both privately and publicly responsible for more areas of responsibility in the business during that time.
Amazing. So you were the fourth employee at LTSE. That is pretty early to bring on a chief of staff. Typically you do see founders bring them on at the Series A. So the timing made sense in terms of the inflection point of the business, but the team was particularly small. So did Eric do anything to introduce the chief of staff role to the rest of the team and kind of set you up for success?
Yeah. So since I was joining so early on, I did have the opportunity to meet the other 3 hires that had already been made as part of my interview process, which was great. I did one-on-ones with each of them. Eric shared about my initial role and responsibilities to brief them before the interview happened. So they had a sense of what I was coming in to do and to own. And then from there, it was this organic process of introducing myself as part of the hiring process for everyone who came after. So since I was deeply involved in hiring basically from the moment I joined the team till the moment I left LTSC, that was a natural way to say, hello, here's what I do. And it was really beautiful actually to come in so early because there wasn't a lot of confusion about the role and what it meant. And I know that that is an obstacle that a lot of chiefs of staff face when they're hired after there's already a team that has been formed and accustomed to operating with the founder and CEO in a particular way. So I did not have that challenge. And I've watched many of my peers who have been in that role have that challenge. And I think the onus is really on the founder, CEO, or the principal of that organization to properly welcome that individual and make it really clear what their role and responsibilities are to the others, to be an evangelist and advocate for that person as they onboard and ramp up.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And usually it's the first question I get after we make a placement. It's, okay, can you help me onboard this person? And, we have the ability to help out there, as part of our engagement process with clients. But, definitely that question comes up with founders and executives who are hiring a chief of staff for the first time, because it's just such a unique dynamic. And like you said, the first order of business is letting the executive team know, hey, this is why we're even before, this is way before you're onboarding the candidate, right?
Yes.
You're basically saying, this is why we need to hire this role. Here's how they're going to give me leverage as a CEO, more broadly for the executive team. You're even going to position that with your board, so they know that essentially the executive team is expanding, not in terms of another C-level employee or VP level employee, but this critical piece that's going to help the well-oiled machine continue as such through the next phase of growth. And so certainly carrying that message on for the rest of the organization, and letting them know why this person's coming in is just so important, and for better or for worse, a big part of how successful the chief of staff can be, especially in those first 30, 60, 90 days.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have so much empathy for all sides, especially we know company building is very intense and people are doing the best that they can and they're spinning a lot of plates at once. And I do think that intention in the beginning makes a huge difference for whether that person can come in and be successful in their role in those first 90 days and start to build the kinds of relationships that ultimately the founder executive would want this person to be able to build as they onboard and start to give them leverage.
So I want to get into a little bit about your time as COO and how that was different from being in the chief of staff role. We've had guests before, people who are COOs, who are CEOs, who have been chiefs of staff and have stepped in the COO seat. But I think everyone has just different perspectives to share and different experiences based on the organizations they've been in and just their uniqueness as individuals. So would love to hear more to that aim.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the most significant shift in terms of the orientation around the role was in the chief of staff position. I was functioning as a very high level strategic advisor to Eric and the other executives who were part of LTSE at that time. And I also had my own areas of responsibility, but it was the posture of advisor. And of course, the chief direct responsibility for significant functional areas in the business. And so you are one member of the executive team and the stakes are higher, essentially. I certainly felt that shift. And a part of that was when we decided to have me move into the chief operating officer position, the entire executive leadership team started to report into me at that time. So there was this very significant change in how we were managing our team as a result of that choice. And I was the sole direct report into Eric at that time. So there was a lot of management around that transition to prepare people, because obviously it was a significant change for especially the early executives who had been hired by Eric, but for the organization to see. And I would say that it was very satisfying for me to make that change, because I was very excited about having the accountability and responsibility for significant areas of the business. And there was a certain level of change and influence that I could have as a chief of staff, but it felt very different to be in the position of chief operating officer at the organization. And playing the chief of staff role at that particular organization on this track to become the chief operating officer allowed me to build tremendous goodwill with the team to allow them to relax into this significant change that we made. And so it was a beautiful trajectory. It was challenging at times, but it was also like the institutional knowledge that I brought, the depth of relationship with many of the team members who would continue to be a part of that journey, those were major value adds in the whole transition.
So you mentioned relationships earlier, and I'd love to know kind of the transition from
Yes. Well, while I was at LTSE, I was very involved in our fundraising efforts and our board. And so that exposed me to a whole world of investors and incredible practitioners who were part of our advisory committee or part of the board of directors. And I was able to build a personal relationships with them over many years, which is great, because I got a sense of how they worked, how they thought about the world, the different problems that LTSE was trying to solve, and of course, beyond LTSE. And when I left, I wanted to build an organization of my own. I took some time off. So I took a sabbatical, because after 5 years of intense build mode, I really needed it. And during that sabbatical, I was regularly, chatting with friends and who were many of them former colleagues or former investors. And there were three investors in particular who are part of the LTSE journey who I deeply resonated with from a values perspective. And we started to triangulate around a similar vision for how we could rethink this relationship between companies and investors, and started to talk informally about what it might look like to collaborate in various ways. And then in early 2022, we decided to come together to form an investment partnership that would essentially be a platform to build a number of different things that we wanted to build in the world. And it was exciting to have other peers who were really interested in the thesis that I was most passionate about, which I will describe as like a more heart-based approach to company building and to the kinds of things that we're creating in the world. And how do we finance those efforts? How do we foster an environment where the quality of relationship between the investor and the company allows that kind of organization to thrive and flourish in the world? And so it was really LTSE that led to this opportunity to co-found the Space Between. And that was an incredible tour of the venture world, which was the first time I was stepping into that seat wearing the hat of investor, which is very different. But of course, like bringing the operator mentality to that particular role.
Wonderful. And what's next for you?
So I have always been really interested in this intersection of mental health and finance. And what I'm working on now is an evolution in our understanding of and relationship with money. And it's going to be a way to support individuals and I think ultimately organizations in that experience. So it's been a very rich inquiry for me, a labor of real love and a synthesis of many different learnings and transmissions that I've received from others over time, but really pulling them together to create a new system for individuals to navigate. And there's so much about the relationship with money that impacts how we see ourselves, how we think about what is possible. So I'm really excited to advance that inquiry and to collaborate with many others who are doing that work.
So the last thing I was going to say was the words we use to describe ourselves are so impactful. And I always thought that we need a new way of describing the amount of money we have.
Beautiful.
And what that actually means in the world, and breaking the link to this phrase of net worth. Because the last thing you want to do is describe your worth as something that's tied to a number, a unit of measure that's not even real, right? If we even get into the topic of the value of a dollar, it's really whatever the government says that it's worth, and not much more beyond that. And so, yeah, it's just something I've noodled on, and it's awesome that you're diving into that space. What can we expect as the next step? Like, what should we keep an ear or eye out for from you in that regard?
Yes, thank you for the question. And I so deeply resonate with what you shared about how we have defined ourselves by our net worth. And this is really at the heart of what I'm trying to get to advance the thinking around how we disentangle these ideas and how we work with money in a very different, more empowering way, both individually and collectively. And where it begins is sharing really the synthesis. So what is money? What is the possibility around money? So the vision for how we could relate to it, and what are some tools and practices to support individuals in the everyday experience of being in a market-based society, a market-based world where we're working with money, but we're relating to it in a new way that is more values aligned. And so it's going to begin through sharing a series of writings and then kind of emerge from there. In terms of what form it will ultimately take, we shall see, but it has been really fun to do the work around it.
That is so cool. I'll wait to read your manifesto around this, because it sounds like that's what it's gearing up to be.
Yeah.
And
yes.
On that topic, I'd love to drop a book recommendation. The book is called Love Money, Money Loves You by Sarah McCrum. And she had a pretty miraculous journey. I think she ended up going completely broke and had a sort of awakening to the fact that money is energy, and you can align yourself with that energy. You can embrace it. And in doing so, bring more of it into your life to help you accomplish the things you're setting out to do. And she has some pretty amazing tips and guidelines on how to change your relationship with money. I found it to be one of the most unique books I've ever come across. So I highly recommend it to people. And it sounds like it's, you're going down that path of helping people redefine that. So amazing to hear. I guess one last question before we sign off here, just bringing it back to the chief of staff role. I always ask guests this: if you could give folks one piece of advice, whether those who are aspiring to get into the role or who are in the role currently, what would that advice be?
My piece of advice would be to really get in touch with your unique strengths and how those will be of service in this particular role. And to be honest about that, I think a lot of chiefs of staff or great operators that I know, their first order of business is to find out how they can be of service to their founder and leader. And I think it's equally important that they are asking themselves, what are my gifts? What can I uniquely bring to this role? And that becomes part of the conversation, part of the shaping of the role. If they do, in fact, have the opportunity to be part of a shaping, say it's an organization's first chief of staff, because I've seen many people take the role and burn out because it was not necessarily what they thought, and so I would strongly encourage that and to have that be a core conversation in the interview process with not only the principal, but also the executives who this individual will be working closely with.
Awesome. Awesome advice. So that wraps it basically. I'll sign off by saying, thank you so much for joining the podcast. And I'm sure the audience has found your insights super helpful and appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
This was Chiefly, your go-to podcast for insights from top chiefs of staff and the founders and executives that work alongside them. Thanks for joining us, and be sure to subscribe to stay connected.